Hey, welcome to the Dream Labs. Dr. Contrast here, and boy, it's good to have you back on board today. And I'm really thankful for the fact that I did not have any confusion in terms of or interruptions with scheduling this week to keep things moving here. And I think this has been a really interesting set of series for me. These last two programs, and we went through phase one, phase two. Phase one was dealing with the box system, how to set up a 1, 2, and 3, and the automobile proportion work and the like, and then how to work it into a 1-point setup, and then just this past Tuesday, we went into a 2-point series in terms of how to put together the proportions together and getting the wheel counts down, getting the widths correct, and how to use facing planes and all these other elements to determine good proportions in vehicle design. And again, it doesn't really happen to be in case of about transportation design, but just good fundamental thinking and using perspective as a really solid tool is an extremely powerful program to deal with, and extremely helpful in every single case. And I think, as I said on Tuesday, during the course of that whole stream, that whole program, I think one of the most important things about all of the things we deal with here is that if we have a good fundamental understanding of perspective and how it begins to function and the rules thereof that are set in stone that you can't violate, they're truthful. And if we understand how to work with those, quite frankly, over the years, I've noticed that it's extremely liberating from the point of view of you know where you are at all times, and you have a good understanding about how to begin to move things through a crisis or a difficulty that might come up. So enough said. I think it's really interesting that we've gone into phase 3 today, and I think I'm going to spend some time here on this stream today with, hey, Shadow King, how are you? Good. How you doing, Chief? Thanks so much for the subscription. It's good to have you on board. Hope you're doing well. Shadow, you're working at home today? I'm trying to kind of come back and survive here with phase 3 and some transportation stuff. Yeah, it's good to see you too, Shadow. But I think it's important to go back in and look at this this whole discipline from the point of view of how fundamentally solid it is to get the proportions down. And working with a lot of young people over the course of time, and even in lectures and workshops, I had a lot of questions about how do you set up the wheel program? How do you set up the proportion? What's the width like? How do you do these things? And so I think that's what motivated these last 2 or 3 streams. And this is phase 3 today. And as I said earlier too, I want to really concentrate on 2 things basically in the stream today. Reinforcing the idea of 3 wheels in between the perspective. Hey, hi Rachel, how are you? Good to have you on board. I just noticed that you picked up a follow here, Rachel, and I'm really glad to have you on board. And I hope all is well with you. Are you home back in Carmel now and Indiana? And if so, congratulations. Super to have you on board, and thank you so much for joining me today. And even though this is a transportation design exercise, it still applies to a lot of different things you're dealing with in product design, architecture, interior space, and exterior design as well. So we'll take some time here to go through some things. But I really want to stress how critical it is to get that wheel plant down, the widths down, overall heights and proportion. And I think the most important aspect of it all too, that we didn't talk about on Tuesday, but it's a very critical element as well, how to work with center lines and how to set up a center line and how to work through it, how to begin to let that determine how proportions come together. So, hey, very good, Rachel. I just got your response here. You're doing very well. Good news. And again, thanks again for joining me today. I'll make this really brief as I possibly can and go through some things. And if you missed 1 and 2, I put them up on YouTube. You can take a look at that too, as far as proportion goes, to hopefully bring you up to speed here. But before I begin this, I don't want to do this. I'm going to come back to a sketch we worked on Tuesday. This is something we did on Tuesday. Of this week, and I really want to bring this to your attention because I noticed when I put this whole program together on Tuesday, this is again the beginning of how to set up a perspective program. For example, getting that leading edge down and then coming back in perspective with the drive line, and then coming back 1, 2, 3 wheels back to get that 3 wheels between the front wheel, 3 in between, and setting that rear wheel down. But what I noticed in this, and a good friend of mine had called me on Wednesday morning and said, boy, I really appreciated the fact that you explained how to set those widths up. So let me just move this up a little bit. Let me show you what happened here. The reason I'm bringing this to our attention is this, that in this conversation when I was working through it on Tuesday, I came out to this leading edge area here, but yet I sent the center line. If you notice this elevation down here, to get the overhang set up, I came through the center line of the wheel, which is back here. Well, truth be told, my apologies, that should have come off of this facing plane here, which is out here, not back at the center line. So I want to make sure I clarify that before we get further. You can go with the center line. That'll work. but it sometimes gives you a real long drag, for example, from front the center line to overhang. It's much easier to come back to this facing plane right here, which is now called a facing plane in 2-point perspective. Find its perspective center, which we did here. And then from that point right here, notice it's the tangent of the tire out in perspective, draw that point, and then right back in perspective and bring it forward. There's my overhang right here, which is now reflected from here to here. So I want to make sure before hey, Rachel, how are you? Rachel, and from Cincinnati. Hey, about that, I've got Carmel, Indiana, and Cincinnati all in the same group. Hey, by the way, Rachel Crackle, did you get the sketch I sent back to you yesterday on the little product design piece that you sent to me? Hopefully that worked out okay for you. So again, back to this conversation again. I just want to make sure I clarify the error I made on Tuesday about I was using the center line as opposed to the facing plane edge here off this leading edge in perspective. So again, to illustrate that here, this is where it really happens off this facing plane. You come forward in perspective like we did here to pick up the overall overhang, then come right back to center line and work that shape right through. So that's where we started there with that guy. So again, I hope that clarifies the situation here. And before I leave the sketch, I think I plotted out a little bit more accurately. Traditionally speaking, to get the right width, it really, good news, Rachel. Thanks very much. I'm glad you got that. I hope it helped you. But I think the thing that's unique about this sketch, and I went back and just put some notes on it. The question came up yesterday from a good friend of mine. How do you determine the widths? And he said, I was amazed at how you opened that up and how to set that up. Now, I want to be careful here. The width is set up on the cube basis. This is the face of a cube on the right-hand side, face of the cube on the left-hand side. If you set that cube up on the right-hand side, then its partner is to the left here. So always remember to come back 1, 2, 3. Now, a good width is set that thing right in half, and then at that point right there become two and a half circles or square or cubes rather, face of a cube is a good way to set up that width. And we'll go through that throughout the course of the afternoon here too, so you can see how that begins to function. Now that doesn't mean it's set in stone. For an exotic machine, lower, wider, you can open that up and stretch it a little bit, and I'll show you that a little bit later as well. But a good rule of thumb is to always keep in mind 3 wheels between the actual wheelbase itself. So you plant the first wheel, go 3 back, and then set that 4th wheel in place. As far as width is concerned, come back 1, 2 to 3 to cut that 3rd cube in half, and then there's your center, there's your width right there. If you keep that inside that boundary line, your proportions are going to be very solid all the way through. And I think that's a critical point to get across, because there's nothing worse than setting a perspective study, for example, that has the right proportion and wheelbase, and all of a sudden it's too narrow or way too wide. And that's a real big problem. And another interesting thing about this whole setup as well that helps us do is once we establish that width and we get that center line to work here. When I started here, I went through this radius. I used that circle inside here to determine where that point of reference was for overhang. And I came out of that and went right back through it again. What helps me do that is this. Notice I see an awful lot of the headlamp graphics over here. But as this surface rolls away and comes away from my eyeball, or my sight line, nothing gets, it all disappears. But so often, if we're not doing this properly, what happens is we see this lamping system here, and we want to do the same thing on that side, which really twists the whole thing, and the whole sketch. And that's what really becomes a real difficult issue here. So again, I just want to go back and use this sketch as a clarification for yesterday's comment about, again, not the center line, but the facing plane edge. Run that through in perspective, find out where you are, then come up forward and begin to pick that overhang up from that point of view. So let's move ahead here. Let's move the sketch here. Let's get these out of the way. I put this sketch together again, real quick little thumbnail study here, a much larger sketch. Again, notice once I got that first wheel down, I went 1, 2, 3 back, got the rear wheel back in place. And this is a pretty good gesture study in terms of a typical process and elevation, or a little bit of 1-point perspective how it operates. But what I thought was interesting again is I went back. Let me move this over just so we can see what this is doing right about there. How's that? Good? Okay. This elevation now begins to tell me that, again, notice here's my face of the cube. Here's my circle or wheel. Again, counting 1, 2, 3 back to get that 4th one in place. But notice here again, coming off that facing plane tangent, that dotted line represents how much overhang I'm going to have when I go into perspective. And I'll show you that in just a moment here. So that overhang becomes very critical. Now, this view here, and again, perspective shows us this. Here's that leading edge. Here's that facing plane I'm referring to right there. So that, then now I find its perspective center, which is right there. And then from that point, come out in perspective. Notice that perspective line is, let me draw this for you here. That perspective line follows the same suit with the drive line out here. Notice perspective, perspective, perspective. They all compatible. They all go back to that vanishing point that helps us begin to operate here to put this thing in proper perspective. So once again, facing plane, and again, use that circle again for overhang. How far I'm going to come out. I came out in space. That distance, found that vertical, and from that point began to build the rest of the shape around that whole form. So again, here's a good illustration. I'm going to stop here just try to explain something here. And the more you begin to deal with the geometry of this whole thing, yeah, it's a very geometric process. It's very mathematical. But at the same time, the mechanical side of it produces the aesthetic side of it. And if we don't have one helping the other, then all of a sudden we're always guessing at certain things. And I just don't want a situation when I put streams on here, no matter what the subject matter is, for us to guess at something, especially something as delicate as transportation design. Because once that begins to take hold and begin to guess at certain things, there's never really a safe place or a point of reference to come back and correct it. So if you start if you start correctly, you'll end correctly. If you start in error, you'll end in error. And I want us to make sure here today that the reason for this phase 3 process, to get us used to thinking in terms of what the geometry does, why it's critical to know what perspective is. And I know it's a horrible subject to deal with. I mean, they'll give you a headache, for example, to go through the pain and agony of perspective. Gee, do I have to go through all that? Yes, you do. Very sorry to be so curt and so fundamentally sound with that comment, but it's absolutely paramount, because to me, the perspective is the genesis of illustration. You cannot do these things successfully without understanding of how the geometry works, of how the math works, and the visualization process. So once again, back to this. Again, that facing plane becomes critical. I step out and get my overhang, and I begin to build that surface around that. And another way to look at that, here's a plan view of that whole setup. Here's that facing plane. That point there is that same reference line here. So what I've done is come right back to center line, stepped it out, which is now this distance and also that distance, created the shape around it, and again, right back in and use my center line here to build the rest of the form, which gets into this little hood graphic element that we see on my top here. So I hope that begins to tell us, for example, the reason I started with the sketch here today is because what it really dictates to us and cries out for us to think about is this, that when you're dealing with a two-dimensional surface like paper, think in the third dimension. What does it look like in the plan view? What does it look like in perspective? What does it look in elevation? All these elements are coming together, and it's it's exhausting in some respects, but at the same time, if we teach ourselves to think in that third dimension, all of a sudden things begin to open up, and you begin to see how one step goes to another and how one leads to another. And I will not deny one iota here. The beautiful thing about perspective and understanding it, the more you begin to understand it, the more you can flatter it and make your sketches far more powerful. You can take advantage of what you understand. And I've always said this over the years as well, and a lot of clinical work, I make this very clear. If it ain't broke, break it. Just break it and start to go in there and look at some things that are much more fundamentally sound from the point of view of really not exasperating yourself, but liberating yourself from the understanding that you've got it now and you can put these pieces together. So I think this phase 3 piece today about getting spacing correct, widths correct, and using center lines to develop the proportion of vehicle design is going to be very, very helpful to you. So I'll come back to this in a moment here. Let's go to this. I know a couple of sketches here. Now, let's go to this guy. Lay these out ahead of time so we can kind of get some good conversation and hopefully some chat work here going together. This is an isolation here, for example, of what we're talking about. This would become my leading edge right here. Now, I'm going to go to widths. This little illustration here helps me to get to the widths now. Now that I've got the circle in place, I've got that face of cube, I lay that in place. I come again, this is now the left-hand side. I'm going to come to the right-hand side and create 1, 2, 3 back. Now, we're going to find that perspective center and open that up, and that point right there, that designation right there becomes my width. Now, we'll show you that in a moment. I've just a couple of illustrations here as to how to begin to put that into practice. And move this over so we don't lose that little thumbnail sketch here. We're going to start looking at not only the width proportion, but how to set up the actual scale and how to develop perspective using center lines, how to guide our way through these sketches. And by the way, I want to make very clear too, we're not talking about design here or a newness or freshness. I'm just using fundamental truths to put scale together and then get it all put together here and to begin to successfully start a sketch and complete it successfully, as opposed to winning halfway through it and wondering why it's not falling together properly or perspective is working here for us. So that little thumbnail sketch tells me where I'm going with it. Now let's turn it around here. Same thing. This is now my leading edge here. Is my 0 reference. I'm coming back in perspective here. There's my face of the cube. I come back in and rotate that out. Now notice, once again, I'm drawing through it, and there's a backside wheel over here, but notice there's a circle in place here. Again, let's use that point of reference. See that point right there? I take it across in perspective, find my center line on that facing plane, drive it up. That tells me where my center line, put that circle in place, that tells me where my center line is. And now that I've got that, I can take that center line and I come right on up into the form, into the windshield, into the far pillar, closed pillar, body form. Again, come back in section underneath and roll that right out of there and get this shape, simply putting it in place. And I think that's the beauty of perspective. Once you begin to see how the geometry works, the sight envelope opens up, and all of a sudden things fall into place naturally, because you've got a footprint to follow, and a section form and an element to deal with, as well as getting the proportion right in the wheels. And again, the center line is very critical. So that's one being very organic. Let's go a little bit sheerer here. Same setup. Again, facing plane, pardon me, face of the cube. Get that one wheel down, 3 back, rear wheel. Now draw through it. Pick up the width. There it is. That's actually 2.5 back, because there's my first one. Here's my second one. Here's my third one. And I've cut that right in half, and there's my point of reference right there. Now, same thing. What I've done here is come off of this shape and pull the line out in perspective. Pull the line out in perspective and perspective. Now, my facing plane is right there, so I'm going to come back from there out to the right here. There's my overhang right there. That line right there. I'm going to do this. Let's fill that in. Here's my overhang. Off of that normal facing plane. That's it right there. No probleme. That's it. I've just moved it from that reference to that reference. That tells me from that front face there, I've opened that up considerably. Hey, Captain Nemo, how are you, man? Good to have you on board. How you doing? Thank you, sir, for joining us today. This is just a phase 3 and just getting some transportation design work done using the fundamental geometry of perspective to create aesthetics. And I think that's what we're after here, to get the widths down, the lengths down, overall heights. And again, notice once I have this, once I have that whole that overhang set up here, now I set up a section, come right back. Here's my center line. Notice right back to that contact point, which is right there. Back to center line, up onto the hood surface, into the windshield, and then over the top. Now I can use that as a setup here. Now off of that set, I come out here at section, out the section, draw that line through, pull that line through into ground clearance, draw these lines through, and get these proportions all set, and it just all falls into place because I've got a clue line here. Hey Nemo, good to have you on board. So I've got some steps and some reference points here to really do some interesting work with. And again, sort of be redundant, but I think it all comes down to understanding how the geometry works and how to work with this stuff. And I've always said this, and a lot of times, I'd rather know where I am as opposed to guessing where I'm going. I want to know from step to step to step what really is beginning to happen, especially if something that's complicated as transportation design. So I think that's really a critical set of circumstances here to deal with. And I think, again, please forgive me for just repeating this over and over again. The more we understand how perspective works, when the mechanics begin to operate, the more fundamentally aesthetic we become. Because now we understand it, we can apply it, and we can adjust it and flatter it as we go. So there's a little study there on just basic setup on how to get that overhang squared away. Next sketch up is this. I've done this ahead of time to save some time, but looking at just basic formats in terms of different package formats for SUVs, to pickups and so forth, and how they all begin to work together. Notice once again, I've just laid out that, sorry again, I just want to make sure that this phase 3 begins to get a little more complicated. I'm going to take some time to just go through it again to show each step along the way, where I got those widths, how I got those lengths, and overall heights. Once again, notice, I started here. Here's my leading edge. I'm standing right here looking at this vehicle. And I'm going 1, 2, 3 back to get that fourth wheel in place. I'm driving an axle through in perspective, an axle through in perspective. That's going to tell me in a moment how to put together the wheel geometry. Now that I've got that in place, I can come across here and go 1, 2, 3 wide, come back to center line, pick that up. There's my overall width right there, which tells me that's where the wheel's going to be planted. I draw that through, for example. Now I come back to center line off of this shape right here. If this now becomes my center, I'm going to open that up and just really begin to draft that through and open that up a little bit. Notice the overhang exceeds where the width of the vehicle is. That's fine, because that's your, again, rear overhang. That's all come into play as well. But notice I'm coming off this backlight down to a brake, into a lower, into a brake. And I take that right across in perspective, take that across in perspective, drive it under, drive it under, and come back underneath it, and begin to use that center line. Notice everything's coming back to that center line as a result of knowing where that width is concerned. Back to upper, and through it in the center line. Again, using that as a contour into section, into shoulder, into contour section. How it all begins to fit together. Learning how to see. It all comes down to understanding what the side envelope does. And I think let's go through here. The reason this axle is so critical is now, and I've got that, I can come back in. If I want to drive the axle or the wheel geometry back in space, I'll come back in here and go into the negative. Now that tells me that section comes out, goes in, comes out and back out again. Now that I'm here, I can come back up vertically. That drop back, about right there. I can come up vertically, put a wheel geometry in, put that in place, put that in place, that in place, that, and that. That told me how to set that rim up, for example. Now I can go back up. If I want to come back out again, it's now this. That section now changed from that, in, up, across. If I want to go back inside again and begin to use those elements. Look how that whole process set up, that whole setup. My connection to the sketchy, that pun. Hey, it gets good. But see how that all begins to operate? And again, using the same principle up front here. Let's go back in and set it up. Back in. Set it up here, center. Break it. Come back out again and set that up. Now use that elements, kind of get the more graphic. Now come back out again. And again. Take that back inside, then go 1, 2, 3, and I get that same detail up front there. All of a sudden, it all comes together here in terms of putting together. Notice the geometry. Even in cases like doing wheel geometry, it all begins to come down to understand what the axle does, and every one of those circles are concentric around that basic wheel start as we started here. And now let's move this guy here. We'll pick up, same process again. 3 back. Getting the body form in. Now notice here's my center line. So I'm going back in here. There's my center line here. Comes down to that point, rolls underneath, comes up over the top. This is a little tight view here, but nonetheless, that center line is there into the windshield, and over the top, that center line has told me how this windshield, wider, narrower, back in again, over body section, comes in, into that, into the body form. And all of a sudden, it all comes together. Using that whole geometry setup to begin part of redo some interesting things with the actual shape itself. So very, very unique stuff, folks. Again, how critical is to come right back to the simple elegance of letting perspective do its work for you. I mean, it just cannot be denied. Let me stop here. Any questions so far, anybody? Am I going too quickly or just making sense? So far, everybody good? Once again, we're not talking about, excuse me, flamboyant design here. We're just talking about fundamental truth and putting it all together so we can a better understanding of how all of it begins to function in terms of putting together the geometry. And again, loving this doc. You make it easy. That's really, I hope that's the case. Thank you, Shadow. I mean, it's not, I do not want this to become an absolute mind-bending headache in terms of, oh, I've got to remember all these pieces and parts. There's a very simple truth to it. Get the wheels planted. I remember guys like Homer Lagasse and Sid Mead, the whole process that they taught us in transportation. Once you plant the wheels, everything else come up off of that from the ground line is correct, because now you've got a good base to work from. You begin to go back to center line, you build the shape off of that, and boy, it just becomes so much more monumentally solid. So again, good example of a rear 3/4, how to use that same. Notice how, one last thing too, notice how that whole process of putting the wheels in place really begin to taper. Notice it's larger here. As you go back, it fades a little bit and it gets a little bit narrower. This width here is a little bit narrower than that width there. Again, that's what perspective does. Yeah, Nemo, making sense. When I see you doing it, I'm like, how the heck can I be different? But when I sit in front of a blank sheet, you all right? No, you're doing well, Nemo. I think some of the work you've done has been very inspiring to look at and see. So makes sense. That's good. I mean, it's not. It takes an awful lot of conversation to kind of put the pieces and parts together. But I think once you talk about it and start to see how it operates, which we'll do in a moment here, it really makes a huge difference in terms of, oh, I see. It's now this to this to this. So each is a synchronizing system. One thing connects to another. But I'm convinced with all my heart, over the course of my career, it's just been so powerful to know that perspective becomes a genesis of illustration. A lot of us that try to illustrate something by just guessing at it, and oftentimes we get extremely frustrated, and it just doesn't really work out for us, and that's a sad situation to kind of experience. But now if we go through this whole idea here of understanding, let's get the geometry right. And again, as I said earlier in the stream, once the mechanics is set, the aesthetics comes in automatically. So let's kind of move ahead here, and we'll come back to these in just a few moments. Go back and get these guys. There's a little pencil sketch. I want to use this for a moment here, or just a real quick sketch here. And again, come back in and just reinforce. I'm going to switch gears here and go to this. I'm going to just go back, and we'll use some pencil work here. Let's lay this down and put a little more tone to it now, and add another dimension, for example. Now we've got the proportion set. I'm going to take a simple thing like a light source and just illustrate just a few little simple things to kind of bring this sketch to life. So let's go back in through here. Set the wheels down. Come back in through here. And again, remember, this sketch was set up using the same process here we've been talking about for the last few moments here. Let's talk about line weight. Get that weight up and then let it disappear. Let's come back in through here, let it disappear. Come back into this tire. The body form. Take it back out again. Notice a little bit of a spear here. Let's take that into place. Blister back here. Notice backside line. I'm going to let that go. Notice that weight there, far more different than that is. Let's come back in through here. There's my reference line here. That line right there is the very same thing we talked about. That reference line right there is the same thing we talked about right here. That point right there. There's my reference line. If I come down vertically, that's going to tell me where my overhang is. So is that making sense? Very good. Hopefully that's making sense, gang. Let's carry on here. Let's come right back to the center line. Notice, now that I've got that set up, there's my center line. Draw it through, into windshield, over the top. Again, into fender line. Let's bring this through here. Let's get some of these elements into place. Pardon the silence here. I'm just going to work on some things. A little bit of ground shadow. A couple of details in the hood, in the windshield, in the form, the detail of the hood, windshield, A-pillar, cut line, now, I'm going to stop there for a moment. Is this making sense, gang? So far, so good. Let's put this back into place here. Now, notice the next phase we do here, I think now we've got some of the proportions down, we're going to move into an area now where light source becomes critical and volumetrics become critical. Volumetrics really are controlled by, for example, those 5 basic solids. There are 5 basic solids that control every piece of information we deal with in the drawing system. And I think it's interesting to note now that light source, if my light source is coming in from up front, and I've noticed this tells me right here, that line right there tells me where the direction of light is coming from. That line down here tells me where the direction of light is coming from, or the angle of light. So I've got angle and direction coming together to give me some instance of how to put together this form here. Let's go back in through here, put more shadow down. Now that I know that, everything in the upper surface here is going to stay in the light source. Everything below that is going to start to tone. So I'm going to come back in through here and just slightly come back in and just a bit of shape to this thing. Notice it comes out. That little change of pace right there tells me that that surface is kicking in or coming upward toward the wheel. See it? Helping, just very simple, that got modeled there. And it comes right back in again here, and then draw it right through, and then step it out again, and just let it go. There's a simple little change right there. Up on top. Now that my light source is coming from behind, that means I can come back in through here and just tone this in, lose it a little bit, come across into that surface here, and again, widen the light source a little deeper in the windshield, take that across. Now, horizon line, a little bit more boldest, come back in through here, pick up a little bit more pencil weight. Fill that in, and back in through here. Little front end graphic. Again, coming back in, notice the angle of light, same thing. Shadow. Line weight. And notice right away, that form comes out of the paper, and it's very simply done, but nonetheless, hopefully kind of gets a point across in terms of where that light source is coming from, light to light to light. Now, back in through here, I can go back in and tone a little bit of the surface here and run that in place. Put a little bit more secondary line in through here, pick up the windshield graphic, a little bit more tone, come forward, bring it into that forward, and there it is, and through here, and again, down through here, just a simple little detail there. And notice shadow, into shadow, and again through, out. Very expressive, but at the same time, all put together on the fundamentals of just letting all of this stuff come together for us. And let me just see if I can get these to work together here for a little bit here. There's one up on top here, and this one down below. Well, maybe not. Let's do this. Now they all begin to work together. How this whole process right here, that whole process here is a result of knowing a little bit about what this is doing down here. The only thing I've added here now is light source and volumes, which hopefully at some time in the future, we're going to add to it. I'm going to let this kind of roost a little bit here and work with you guys a little bit, and to get this whole process of proportions down with perspective, center lines, wheel count, and so forth. Let that settle in. But I just take a little jump ahead here today to show you what might be coming down the line in terms of getting into tone, light source, and volume, and how to work with it. So let me stop there for a moment. Any questions you might have from the gang from the chat? What do you think, gang? Is this making sense? coming together, how one begins to lead into another. And I think the magic of this whole process of perspective and proportion leads us to do things like this. And again, I hope I didn't jump too far ahead here with that conversation we just had here. Let's put a little bit of tone in this and kind of kill that back. Just so that's all varies in here. And then now you can get back and move with the line weight to kind of, again, flatter what the forms are doing in here. Just let this all come together. It's just very, very unique in terms of putting it all without a lot of effort. Very simple. Notice how much paper is opening up there. And we'll get into that later on as I go here. I'm going to be quiet just for a moment here. Please feel free, anybody, any comments at all. Rachel from Cincinnati, Rachel from Carmel, Shadow, Captain Nemo, what do you think? I think that angled line from the top and the shadow along the bottom, along the horizon line, what today's, yeah, could you clarify that again? That I think that angled line from the top. Oh yeah, this guy right here, this guy on top here, that becomes my angle of light or direction of light. Pardon me, along the horizon line with today's. Yeah, now that I've just dropped that, and that tells me where that shadow is going to drop off of that form. So if I put a section in here, the shadow, it's really kind of blisters out like so, and that white point tells me where that shadow is. Now this direction of light tells me that that light's coming from the front. The direction is from the front, but the angle is very severe. So the two work in harmony. We'll get into that stuff later on as we go down the line here. So, but the point is it helping? Did I make it clear for us here, Shadow, or pardon me, Nemo? So far, so good? It's basically the tangent. Yeah, there you got it. Tangent to the door. You got it. Exactly correct. Now I can come back in through here and add a little more tone to this guy. Just not to kill it, but just to kind of put some surface work together. And again, line weight up front. And let that delve right into that little form right there. That comes back and picks up that widow's peak. There it is. And then out of it again. Simple little structural pieces that come together here, folks. And it's not a great design. I'm just trying to look at how the whole thing comes together in terms of putting all the pieces together we've been talking about over the last few weeks. Pardon me, a few sessions rather. Again, anybody, any comments at all? Hopefully I'm communicating this material clearly enough because it can get a little bit very confusing in a hurry. I do not want to be the agent of confusion. I want to clarify some things for us so we can work with it in time to come. Any comments here at all, guys? So far, so good? Well, good. I mean, I hope this is making sense. This has been, let me stop here for a moment and just kind of chat a bit here from myself. This has been really good and healthy for me as well, because it's gotten back into the situation where, and I hope I can say this in the proper spirit, so don't misunderstand. I get to the place where it becomes so automatic that just I don't think about it. It just becomes automatic. So please don't misunderstand. It's not an arrogant comment at all. I've been taught to be confident and I really feel confident in what I do in terms of lines are concerned. Nemo, you are right. Never noticed that. Yeah, the angle of light is a tangent to the door. You got it, Shadow and Nemo. Well done. And I'll cite that in a moment here. So what happens is when that comes together, it just really has been unique over the fact that I really feel strongly about the fact that good perspective is the genesis of illustration. And all these pieces come together as a result of that. So it's light source in the next series. For example, the next series, away from perspective, is going to go into light source and volumetrics. And again, for those of us who do all this work, no matter what the design discipline is, it all begins to work together, whether it's vehicle design, transportation, or pardon me, product design, interior space design, or architectural exterior design, landscape work. It all begins to work together. And everybody, that line in the door face is dark. Yep, you got it. Everything below that. Yeah, let's do this. You got it there, Nemo. Let's do this. Let's do a little isolation. Yes. If I were to take this whole form, this is my center line. Here's my upper section form. And come out here to that shoulder and roll that out of there. I come down here to base. And there's my A pillar here. I come back into this shape. And do the following. That angle of light is doing this. So that hits that tangent right there. As it comes down, everything into the light source, all of that stays paper. And this area here becomes reflective light. Interesting. So everything now below that, this whole area gets toned. That's it. That's what happens. That whole, now I can go back and notice, I didn't come down to the base here. That little area right there becomes reflected light. So I can come back and go a little deeper with this and really accentuate where that core is and come out of it, but I'm not going to go right down to the base, down to here. That area right there, from there to there, is now reflected light from the ground coming back up into the form, which again gives it so much more newness. Helping, guys? There it is. So that rolls out of here. That comes out of there into my hood fine. All of that. Let's switch gears here. Everything here, everything in red. All of this, from there to that contact, to shoulder, to edge, right down to here, all remains in the light source. From that point on down, it all goes into shadow. You've got it. Excellently. Well done there. Nicely done, Nemo. Much appreciated. And again, for anybody else, any questions or concerns here, we're going further. Anybody at all? Very delicate stuff. And again, I want to make sure that this makes sense for us. This all comes back down to what's happening with this stuff here. So much. Hey, Captain Nemo, thank you very much. Really appreciate it, Doctor. It's good to have you on board. Again, it all comes down to, notice how they all begin to relate to one another. Let's do these sketches together. This geometry helps us produce that aesthetic. Not a very great sketch, but it just helps to just generate the aesthetic. And again, same thing down below. If I come back into here and do the same thing here, and get that vehicle in place, no matter what your geometry is, whether it's pickup truck or SUV or coupe or sedan, it all functions together. And I just really want to know, I much appreciate it, Captain Nemo. Thank you so much. So let's go back to this. Let's use this last example here. Let's get this sketch out of the way. I'm going to come back to the one we opened up with here, this little study here. I can take that same set of circumstances. Let me just move this over just a bit so it's not out of the way here. And with very simple understanding of what light does. Come back in through here and just begin to tone this thing. Indicate where the shadows are. Put line weight into place. Come back over the top of the shoulder. Again, just a simple little study here. Center line, in the tone, in the lamping graphics. In the lamping graphics. Down below, take that form. Now it steps back out of here. Take it right on through into that. Tone it. Bring it in. Tone it. Into line weight. Into reflection. Horizon line. Follow through. Go deeper. And there it is. Nice little line study. There it is, gang. So hopefully that makes sense. All of this now begins to part, again, this started it, understanding it, putting it into action, and then showing what happens when you put a bit of light source on this thing and begin to really create a very simple series of sketches here. So you've been very kind here to follow along with me. I hope this is making sense for you, gang. And again, I'll stop here for a moment. The next probably, if I'm going to give us a bit of a break to kind of absorb a little bit here, maybe get some questions coming in from you all in time to come here. But I do want to know, alert you to this, what's coming here. It's going to be a lot of fun, I think, as far as this whole proportion series goes, this vehicle design work. I think I'll go back into maybe a couple of weeks here, put a couple of lesson plans together on the next step, which is light source and how volumes work, and see how that all comes together, and begin to get into that, plus light source, volumetrics, and how to shade and how to illustrate these surfaces, and get into some much more formidable and productive exercises in addition to just perspective. But I do want to make sure that that this three-part stream has basically been to set up proportions and how to work with scale, size, widths, lengths, heights, center lines, all the essential things we have to deal with. And if we ignore them, then we've really done ourselves a disservice. So I hope these last three have really been of good help to you. And I just got to know, nice, Nemo, fine sir you are. Yeah, I do appreciate it, Nemo. Really do. I know you're coming in from Europe and taking the time to watch this, and I really respect your input and your time spent and the relationship we've built with one another, visually speaking, here over the course of Discord and chat and Twitch. It's been terrific for me. So thank you very much, Captain Nemo. Very much appreciated. And but before I depart here, I thought we'd just take a moment here and give you a couple of examples of to make sure that I don't want to be the author of confusion here. Let's go back to that first one we looked at here. This sketch right here we did on Tuesday. Let's go back to this guy just for a moment. One of the things I want to make sure that we leave you with the solid understanding of is this, that when you come together with sketches like this, even though we're talking about 3 wheels, for example, between the front and rear, and just count 3 back and then go 2.5 wide to get the proper width down. That does not mean you have to live there. You can take exercise here. Once you get that proportion done, you start to see it visually, and it becomes part of the muscle memory. It becomes a very interesting thing to deal with. And now you can look at it from the point of view of how to deal with this stuff. You can now say, okay, I want a little bit wider, I want a little lower, a little bit longer. I wouldn't exaggerate too much, but I think it's really very helpful to know that what I want to make clear of before I depart here this afternoon and in this exercise and this program is this. Even though we're talking about the box system being the basic setup of 3 deep and 2.5 wide and so much height and so forth, one on top of the other, and notice you can, that fluctuates. You can change that. But I don't want to leave the impression with at all times you should sketch in that format. That's a basic fundamental truth to get started with. And you can adjust those elements accordingly and begin to adjust it. For example, I got a couple of examples here. Here's another little marker study of let's do this, get these guys out of the way. Let's turn this over so we can see what we've got here. Little marker study on a traditional wheelbase, just on, let's just see what's coming, some thumbnail sketches on how to deal with proportion. This is a very typical 3 back, 2.5 wide. SUV platform, just a simple little sketch, 1 or 2 markers. That's all coming in the next series we'll do here in some of the execution work, not only for transportation design, but everything else we're dealing with here on Twitch as well. So that's one way to keep it pretty honest. This, again, a technique piece. It's a media piece. And again, all predicated on understanding perspective, how to drive it, notice how things begin to collapse, and how things really kind of taper back, and how those 3 wheels back begin to set a proportion. And but I think the other nice thing about this thing is too is you can take advantage of not only the traditional 3 set 2.5 wide, but when you move into things like this, you can really kind of cheat the proportion. And all of a sudden, look how much wider that beauty is. You can take advantage now of that whole thing. Now I would love to know how to calibrate when we don't have wheels. I think Blade Runner spinners or a Star Trek. Yeah, there you go. That's kind of neat. We can do that too, Neiman. That's a great suggestion. Maybe we can take this whole platform and begin to move it into like space vehicles and things that do not have wheels, and how to get those proportions set up as well. So again, it still will come back down to, I think the one common denominator we have in all of this is a really solid understanding of perspective. And perspective, to me, I've said it over the years, and I believe it with all my heart. Perspective is the genesis of illustration. It just screams from the corridors of creativity. You can't do anything, and I'm going to rephrase that. It's impossible to do things successfully well visually without a really good understanding of perspective. Now, I don't understand it well. I'm still working at it. Don't misunderstand. I'm still working at it. Just so far advanced in terms of what I'm aware of. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And yeah, Rachel, thank you. I'm excited for the light source lessons. I feel that's right. Yeah, we all need to work on light source, and I think that's a good reminder for me as well, Rachel. So good point. We're going to go to the light source and then into volumetrics. And I think one of the things about volumetrics that's unique in working with light is that each one of those volumes, the 5 basic solids, have definite constitutions, how light affects them, how to work with them, and how to place the emphasis in shadow and reflected light and ambient light and all those pieces we're dealing with. Very interesting, because now we know that we can begin to handle ourselves much more just much more efficient with it, and it really makes a huge impact. So let's see. Starship Captain Nemo. Yeah, me too. Geometry and perspective gives it structure, but light source makes it yeah, it does. Light is a real key to it all. I think if I were to put together a triad of fundamental truths in order for successful visual operational work, it would be simply this. Number 1, perspective. Number 2, light source. Number 3, volumetrics. They all work in harmony. It's just like 1 and 2 point perspective. They all work. There's a certain fundamental truth in them that begin to deliberate certain things and begin to direct our attention and increase our impact and sensitivity to it, and all predicated on being successful. I think that's the thing that we're looking for. Not to be successful. Oh, I'm better than you are. Look how great my work is. That's not what I'm talking about. That's not success. That's arrogance. What I'm talking about successful is it's a success, and I see something in my mind's eye. I've got an image. Now I'm going to follow through with these fundamental truths and get it there. Now, I've often said this over the years, know the end from the very beginning. And that doesn't mean from step 1 to step 2 that it's going to be 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. It'll change. It'll jump back and forth. It'll fluctuate. But the point is, you're having a conversation with creativity. That's what I've been doing all this afternoon, a conversation with creativity. What if I did this? What about this? And then the answer comes back. Nope, that's an error. Oh, that looks pretty good. It's a conversation at all times. So I think that's the unique thing about the drawing process. It's never been, in my opinion, it's never been a visual process. It's a verbal process. It's understanding the language. And Rachel Lyle had a comment here. I like the sci-fi idea a lot. In the future, I would love some soft goods. Oh yeah, soft good lessons. That's all part of the parade there too, Rachel. So I thank you so much for the input. Light source, soft goods, space vehicles. It all begins to generate itself, and the intrigue is enormous. And I think for all of us, and especially the student base here, the great thing about it all is it's really unique in terms of the more you understand all these things and how they work, from soft goods to sharp goods, reflective surfaces, non-reflective surfaces, you put that in a portfolio, you're absolutely golden in the marketplace. So those things are noted. And if you don't mind, Rachel, both Rachel in Indiana and Rachel in beautiful downtown Cincinnati, and Starship Captain, put together a list of things you'd like to see me do, and drop me a note at my website at jim@drcontrast.com. I'd love to be able to work with you on those kind of things and put together some lesson plans so that you're getting what you need to hear from me, instead of me going on every Tuesday and Thursdays about subject matter that might not be of interest to you. So feel free to do so. And again, last but not least, take a moment and visit my website at drcontrast.com. There's some neat things going on there. There's a lesson plan to put together here. We've had 9 lessons and so forth, but we're adding to it hopefully a store in the coming future with some of my design work on t-shirts and graphics and poster graphics, and more so t-shirt than anything else now. We're trying to put together a platform for that. So drop me a note at jim@drcontrast.com for information on what to deal with. And secondly, please do take a look at our website, drcontrast.com. And again, really appreciate the input. Really cool. Interesting. So nonetheless, gang, have a great day. Thank you so much for being part of the process today. I hope this third phase here has been of some help to you in wrapping it all up. And it's not a wrap up, but again, we're going to carry on with this in time to come here. But phase 1 was getting the box system down, 1, 2, and 3, how to set up a 1-point setup in the 3 systems, 1, 2, and 3 box area. The next one we did was just dealing with 2-point perspective and how to set up the lengths, heights, and widths of a vehicle. And this last one was a review of that and just reinforcing, again, once that's set, how light and volumetrics begin to put into place here from the idea of automobile transportation design proportions. So thank you so much for your attention. Terrific part, gang, today. Appreciate the input from all of you. And again, Starship Captain Nemo, thank you so much for the subscription. I really appreciate appreciate you and what you're doing over there in Europe. And to both Rachel's and the Nemo and the Captain and the Shadow Man, thank you so much for joining us here today. And I always close off with this. I think it's absolutely critical. Never forget to remember to dare to be great, because you are. All the best, gang. Take care and have a terrific holiday. We'll see you next Tuesday. Thank you. Bye-bye now.